Okay, please välkomna. First of all, thanks to CEPS, Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels, who is managing this project. It's a very political project. We want to achieve change. So I will talk later, but I will. This is our chair for the first quite long session. This is the amazing also staff member sometimes here, Sunita Mehmetovic, well known in Sweden and abroad, defense lawyer, human rights activist, double master and everything. So thank you, Sunita. I'm very proud to give you a word. So the room is yours.
Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me. I have a microphone here, so most probably you can. If you can't, please tell me. Let me know. So good morning to all of you, each and one. My name is Sunita Mehmetovic. I'm the chairman of this very important event where we are gathered to promote human rights and to combat the anti-Gypsyism. Thanks to all of the organizations who made this discussion achievable. So the substance of this 1.5 hours is to learn about the basic concepts of the Chachipan project. So we will check it or analyze it from an international concept, but also from a Swedish concept, looking at the Chachipan project in Sweden. I'm going to introduce the panelists one by one. Each of them will have a short talk, and we will also, since we have a short amount of time, please, I hope all of you, the panelists, can respect the time we have and your time slot. I am a lawyer, so for us it's very important to be punctual. So I will actually clock your time and let you know after 1 minute that you have to summarize your words. And that's why I'm telling you this already now. Yeah, I think that's my introduction remarks. So I will start by letting the first speaker talk, our Soraya Post. Many of you in this room know who she is, the first member of the European Parliament, well known in Sweden and Europe for her work with promoting the Roma rights. Please, Soraya, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much and good morning. As you said, Sunita, this is one of very important discussions and events we will have. And this project, Chachipan project, done by CEPS, is so important and so crucial that we really discuss it very good and hard. And there are several countries included, and not listening, we didn't have the launching from all of them. We are starting here in Sweden. But as you said, I have been working for a long international level, and I think I can say that what we will listen to is about the same structures and the same situations when it comes to anti-Gypsies. I don't know, but I was supposed to be there in person with you, but I could not. And then I was supposed to do my intervention here at my work where my speech is, but I am at home and very cold and with fever, but I will try my best because I think it was very important for me to be included and be present in any form because I have seen the development in Sweden since many years, and I think that Jan will highlight some issues during the day. But I would like to start anyhow that in the early 2000s, we started very strongly to speak about anti-Gypsies, anti-Ziganism. And then the government decided that we should have an inquiry on Roma rights. And I was one of the members of this inquiry, and we worked hard for 2 years and produced a very thick book with a lot of recommendations on the situation in different top areas in Sweden. And for the first time, I think one of the areas was anti-Gypsies. And there is a very good and famous professor, Steen, who had the lead on, together with me, on anti-Gypsies. And the results of that is that because we recommended a lot of issues. And one of the issues we got, instead of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, was a white book. We also got a commission against anti-Gypsies. I was in both of them. When we launched the white book, I think I was one of the few who were really disappointed and declared very clearly that, okay, for 100 years, shall we start write a new one again? Because the situation at that time was really infected, and it also showed out because then the police register were about 5,000 Roma were registered because of ethnicity. I was one of them. My children were also. And with the commission, we had about 2 years work. So we had that on our table also about the police register. Also from the Commission Against Anti-Gypsies, we delivered recommendations. Until today, none of the recommendations has been even discussed with people in response, politicians, or any state secretaries. And what we do recommend is, how to say that in English, let's say like some kind of an authority done by Roma, working Roma inside with a direct position with contact with other authorities, or maybe a secretariat to work further on this issue on anti-Gypsies. We were in Sweden ahead. So you can, I was very positive, very happy when I heard that Germany wanted to follow up and do the same, also have a commission on anti-Gypsies, and they did. But they were most successful because their government, they listened to the recommendations from that commission, and they developed, let's say, a commissioner, Mr. Mehmet, and also with the budget. So I know that he started in early spring, and that he has been traveling around Germany, meeting all the German Roma and Sinti groups. And also I know in Germany, they have a research center at Heidelberg University on anti-Gypsies. While we in Sweden, we don't have anything. So since 2004, we had a lot of inquiries, commissions, white books, but not any political stand how to proceed. We don't even have in our national strategy of inclusion of Roma an act or a position or an action plan on how to fight, how to combat anti-Gypsies in Sweden. So I am very disappointed on how the Swedes have handled the situation of Roma. And I don't know if some of you are aware, crusades towards Roma now by media. And so we have no we have no one or nothing, not a structure who really can go out and speak on our issues or take the debate. If we want to do that, we have to do this as a single person, as individuals. And I must say that these latest crusades from media since 1st of August really showed how weak as a group we are. So this is a very important and crucial discussion. What can we do? And if we have, and I think you all know the political, how we are having the political situation.
1 minute left.
Yeah, I think you are aware of the political situation in Sweden now, which doesn't encourage us at all that we can look forward any bettering. I don't know. But what we really need is to have this agreement, us together from the different country and push together on the specific countries. You know, Sweden just celebrated 100 years of democracy. Of course they did, because we have never been included. We didn't have the possibility to vote until 1950, 60, but still they celebrate 100 years of democracy. So it just shows that even today, 2020, we are not counted as citizens. So, yeah, I'm sorry if I took too much time.
No,
I will try to be, I will try to be with you as long as I can. And I'm looking forward for the discussion, and will also listen to all of you. And I wish you a fruitful conference. It is very important. And thank you, all of you who are there. And thank you, Lina, Chachipin, Jan, you are great. You really stand up for human rights, Roma. I met you in Malmö, and I really was impressed by your presentation, Jan. It was super. And this is what it needs to be. It needs to be political. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Soraya, for opening the conference with this insight information about what is happening in Sweden with the Roma rights, and also the perspective of anti-Gypsyism and how you see it, and what we need to do to improve the situation. The next panelist is a pioneer through his position, and I'm not going to say the German word for it because I'm so afraid that I'm going to spell it wrong. But I can say it in English, and he's the first commissioner in Germany, but also in Europe, and most probably in the world, working with anti-Gypsyism. And we can compare it and kind of saying that it's not ombudsman, but something in that perspective. Please very welcome Dr. Mehmet Daymaguler for a talk. No sound. Oh, we don't hear you. We don't hear you, doctor.
Yes,
you are unmuted. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Well,
great.
Yeah, thank you very much for your kind words, and for the invitation to speak a little bit about my office, about my tasks ahead. Soraya mentioned our commission called the Unabhängige Kommission Antiziganismus. It was a commission installed by the last government, and which presented its results in summer last year. And one of the key demands of this paper was the establishment of my office. And my office is not so much an ombuds person. It's pretty much position which I have to coordinate and in which I can contribute to the agenda. As you know, Germany is a federal country. I'm the federal commissioner, and my task is to coordinate all the federal ministries which are dealing in one or the other way with topics which are important for the community. And often enough, our ministries do not know about the activities of other ministries. So there's a lot of coordination work to do. But more importantly, topics which are important for the communities are police, the justice system, the racism and anti-Gypsyism within the police force, the situation in the schools, in the kindergartens. But all of these topics are state topics, state matters. It's not federal matters. What I'm trying to do is to coordinate the efforts on a federal level. And a very first step, I want to establish an ongoing council which is coordinating the federal and the state's efforts. Within this council, my role will be to make sure that not only, let's say, feel-good topics will find their way on the agenda, but the real hard and tough topics. And we need to talk about anti-Gypsyism within the police force. This is in the German context in particular important because, and this is a topic which has been dealt with within the Commission a lot, is the genocide. And what we experienced was a genocide which never have been really acknowledged by Germany. Helmut Schmidt was the first chancellor who used the word genocide. It was only in 1982, 37 years after the war, that he used the word genocide in the context of Sinti and Roma. And it's only 2 years ago that a German president apologized for the genocide. So we have a lot to do when it comes to acknowledging what happened between 33 and 45, but equally, and maybe more importantly, we have to deal with the time after 1945, because what happened was the murderers, the people who aided the little and the big part of the machinery which led to Auschwitz. These people, they remained in their offices, they remained in their posts, they made career, especially in the police force. And they became the overlords of the narrative. And the narrative was, well, yes, we deported them into the camps, but it was not because of any kind of racial aspects. It was a part in the combat against criminality. And this narrative of the criminal Sinti and Roma has been part of the DNA, not only of German police forces, but in general. And we need to deal with what the Commission called the second persecution, die zweite Verfolgung, after 1945. And dealing means not in a historical, far away kind of dealing, but always raising the question, which fields can you see the impacts of this kind of narrative in today's life? It's about the lives of Sinti and Roma today. And let me give you one or two examples. We have excluded Sinti and Roma from the school system in the 30s and 40s. Even the people who survived were not able to get a proper education. The lack of education is something which is inherited over generations. So we have, all in all, a situation in which the younger generation is suffering from the exclusion of their parents and grandparents from education. So it's not only important to acknowledge that, but also to ask what can we do today? What resources do we need in order to compensate these deficits caused by German politics? Another important issue is the aspect of transgenerational traumata, not being able to getting the own pain acknowledged, being a survivor of the Holocaust, but living in a country which is still playing the soundtrack which led to Auschwitz, the soundtrack of these are people who are criminals, these are people who do not work, and so on. So this traumata, this psychological traumata, have an impact on everyday life of these people. And in challenging German society, German politics, German police, German judicial system, and education, in confronting this part of our history and of our reality today, this is one of the most important jobs I have to fulfill. And in doing so, I'm not going to develop projects and ideas in my office. It's very important, crucial for me to do everything what I do in close cooperation with self-organizations. And this is one aspect of my job, which is really something which enriches my life also on a personal level. The meetings with the whole landscape of self-organizations, traditional self-organizations such as the Zentralrat des Sinti und Roma, new organizations like the Bundesverband Sinti und Roma, small organizations like Queer Roma who are dealing with questions of gender and identity and sexuality. This is something really I feel as an enrichment, not only for me personally, but also for my office. And I think we are obliged to do something not only in bracket for in Roma. We need to do it for us to be able to look into the mirror and to say we are a really democracy, and we are a country in which our political system is circling around the dignity of every and each human being. This is something we need to do for ourselves and for our children and for the future of our society. This is my belief. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Can I just elaborate with you on two questions? Listen to you and your work. I'm thinking of one of the questions I'm thinking of is what kind of problem do you see on promoting? Maybe that's not the right word, but promoting Roma rights from your working as a council, having a council now, and the political discourse in Germany. What kind of problem do you see to promote the Roma rights? That's the first question. And the second question, we want something like you have in Germany here in Sweden, no? Like we want a commission as well. We want a council. So what kind of advice do you give us for us to be able to have this in Sweden as well? If you can elaborate on those two questions.
Well, question one. We have comments anti-Semitism, and many say that my office was designed according to the office of the Commissioner against Anti-Semitism, which is in some parts true, but in some parts it's not true. You know, anti-Semitism is condemned by the majority of this country. Yeah. Of course, we have Nazis and we have fascists even in our parliaments, but the majority of this country, knows anti-Semitism is something to be condemned. When it comes to anti-Ziganism, situation is different, unfortunately, because anti-Gypsyism, prejudices against Sinti and Roma are not regarded as something like racism. It's not regarded as something to be condemned. It's in some ways deeply rooted in the DNA of society. Yeah? So I have had a meeting with Mr. Klein, our commissioner against anti-Semitism. He's a great guy and he's doing tremendous job. And he told me about his successes when he established commissioners against anti-Semitism in police forces, in the office of the prosecutor, and so on and so on. And you know, when it comes to my job, yeah, we need to talk about police officers who are beating up Sinti and Roma. We are talking about police forces who are villainizing Sinti Roma as criminals. So our fight starts on a much deeper level, and this is the biggest challenge. And you know, nobody likes, you know, to change your internal set of beliefs. Yeah, and especially if a change is connected with shame. Yeah? So we need to confront people, and in knowing that defense mechanisms on a personal but also on a governmental level are very strong. Yeah? But we need to do it. And the good thing is, I think we have allies in the politics. I think we have allies in between, especially the younger generation. And the most important point is, we do have self-organization who have ended this omerta who came from outside, who silenced the people. And the self-organizations are not any longer willing to be silent. You know, Sinti and Roma have been living in Germany for the past 600, 700 years. They have influenced every single aspect of our daily life. And now they are demanding to be recognized, to be heard and be seen. And this is something totally legitimate. And I think more and more people understand that we can't call ourselves a democracy and at the same time dealing with a minority as if they have been people of second class. And you know, I don't know what's going on in Sweden, but I think the number one success factor are strong, independent self-organizations. And I mentioned Helmut Schmidt, who recognized in 1982 the genocide as the first time. But you know, Mr. Schmidt didn't recognize the genocide out of the goodness of its heart. He recognized that after self-organization started a hunger strike in Dachau, a place in which thousands of people have been killed. It was the self-organizations who pressured the government to recognize a part of our reality. And at the end of the day, you know, in Germany, there are two kinds of supporters of our topics, of our goals. One are truly people who believe that injustice has been done. Injustice is happening right now, and it does not fit to our self-recognition as a democracy. And there's a second group of people who are supporting our goals, not out of an internal belief, but knowing that, you know, it makes Germany look bad in the world if a minority, especially if it's we are dealing with people who are the descendants of survivors of the Holocaust, it does not make Germany look bad, look good in the world. And the combination of these two forces pushed time and time again by the community itself.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Also, thank you for being here with us today. We appreciate so much. It would be good to have you here, of course, in Södertörn on site. But and I hope you will be able to in the future come and visit us here in Sweden. Thank you for being here.
One last sentence. One of the most important points will be the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And I think this is a topic I really would like to discuss also with people abroad. I think we need a broader perspective in approaching this project. I know there have been this kind of committees, for example, in Norway, in Canada, in South Africa. And I think when it comes to Sinti and Roma, not only Germany, but many countries across Europe should think about establishing this kind of committees. Committees not dealing only with the past, but with our very reality, which we are living today. And I think majority in societies, we have been too comfortable and too blind for too long, and it's time to end this.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. And did you notice that I spoke exactly 9 minutes?
Yeah, I noticed that. I noticed that. Good job.
I have to watch. Thank you very much, guys, and I wish you a great conference. All right.
So the next panelist we have is Lina. Sorry if I'm spelling your last name in not correct way. Visualete, research fellow and coordinator of the Chachipen in SEPS. Lina, she will give us the perspective of the basic concept of the Chachipen project. Welcome, Lina. The floor is yours.
Okay, and I will share my presentation. I wonder if you can see it. Oh. Okay. Can you see it well?
Yeah, we see it. We see it.
Okay, great. So first of all, once again, congratulations to Jan Selling and Valeria for convening this conference. It's a true delight to connect, the Swedish context and the European context. And it has been a great pleasure and honor for SEPS to cooperate with the colleagues in Södertörn in putting this project up. And now I would like to shortly introduce the Chachipen project, because we know there are a lot of students from Sweden following this webinar. Also, Romani students coalition has been happening yesterday, if I'm correct. And therefore, we would like to shortly introduce the project and to engage you with it and to ask you to follow us further. So Chachipen stands for okay, yeah, it means truth in Romani language, or at least this is what we were told. We heard it also means justice. So actually it's perfect, because we are speaking about finding truth and, trying to access justice by establishing the truth, historical truth. So the project is titled Paving the Way for Truth and the Reconciliation Process to Address Anti-Gypsyism in Europe, and it has like 4 cornerstones: remembrance, what happened for Roma in the past, a recognition of anti-Gypsyism and especially historical roots of anti-Gypsyism, and trying to bring about and provide the venues for justice, and finally to encourage and rebuild the trust between Roma and non-Roma in the society. So it's a participatory research on this historically rooted anti-Gypsyism, and we put our efforts to uncover and to see what kind of commissions like those in Sweden and Germany, and what kind of other transitional justice tools that have been used to address other sorts of grave human rights violations in the past could be used or could provide for some efforts for compensation or non-recurrence in this context of anti-Gypsyism. We also are working with our great civil society partners. So Central Council for German, Sinti and Roma and Ergo are part of our consortium, as well as our national members, FAGIC and Associatia Fast Forward. And we are hoping to strengthen advocacy capacity and also to increase knowledge among Roma activists and communities, because one of the findings from the earlier reports is that even communities themselves sometimes do not know very well their past or what happened to their ancestors, and especially when going back, let's say, to the Middle Ages or settlement of Roma, and how this historical anti-Gypsyism still continues to have legacies and to impact Roma rights today, which is the topic of today's conversation. So we also aim at targeted awareness-raising activities among policymakers, media, public institutions. And here a little promotion that we also invite you to follow us on Twitter especially. And today our excellent intern Victoria Schnick is tweeting. So please follow this discussion also and engage with us. So here's our partnership. SEPS think tank is leading the project, and I mentioned we closely cooperate with civil society partners, because without them, the project would be only resting on the books, or our reports would be resting and having little impact. But thanks to them, and thanks for their effort, knowledge, and enthusiasm, I think we are getting a bit in these different political arenas. And Jan was introducing that project is political. We are based on very good basis of research findings, and therefore research has been one of the cornerstones of this project, that we really try to kind of apply this transitional justice process and to investigate what happened in Romania, what happened in Spain, but more precisely also how those anti-Gypsyism commissions have worked in both Germany and Sweden. And today we'll dive deeper into the Swedish context. And we just heard an excellent presentation from Mehmet about the German context too. Yes, so what we are trying to do, or our overall objectives, are to investigate the truth by analyzing and understanding what happened to Roma in the past. And as I mentioned, we have specific 4 member states that we are focusing on to map the states of play and to which extent this past is already recognized in those contexts. And here, of course, we see Germany and Sweden a bit raising the flag. However, we see some very promising initiatives happening in Spain, where the democratic memory law has been just approved in this July, and there is also starting an investigation into Franco's regime and what happened to Roma. And also in Romania, a project arrives in the time when there is renewed, let's say, political efforts to discuss Roma slavery in Romania, also like the past crimes or Roma situation during the Ceausescu's regime. So we are trying to learn from some promising experiences. Maybe when starting this project, we looked at Sweden and German independent anti-Gypsyism commissions. We set them as promising practices, and actually thanks to Jan's deeply critical and in-depth research, we find out those lessons that really need to be learned when trying to set up such commissions. Another goal is, as I mentioned, to empower Romani activists to advocate, to give. Sorry, 1 minute.
1 minute left.
Okay, to empower Romani activists to advocate for such processes in the language of truth and reconciliation. And finally, yes, to raise awareness about anti-Gypsyism. So our project maybe is coming with this slogan or idea that those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So this is famous phrase of George Santayana, his historian. And we really believe that in order to address the past, it first needs to be understood and known, not only by Roma, but also non-Roma. And then we can really investigate and search for justice or ways to address it. So here are just quickly our reports on transitional justice for Roma, where we tried to provide a first, let's say, goal on how transitional justice could apply for Roma. And you can find it in CCPEN website. We had an excellent conference, among other events, in Geneva, where we convened already with UN Special Rapporteur on Transitional Justice, UN Special Rapporteur on Minorities. And this is showing that, you know, new venues are possible, and new approaches or new way of raising Roma claims is also possible, and maybe can contribute to this ultimate goal, which is not only to know the truth, but to access justice and to rebuild the trust. And
I think we have, I am sorry, I don't want
yes,
to be rude, but I have a schedule which I need to follow. So
great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunita. Maybe very last word, that we are having another event in Madrid on 16th December in Spain, and we very much would like to invite you to follow and to engage with us on this, where we launch also the Spanish report. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We will open the floor. Maybe you will get some questions done, Lina. So straight ahead to the next presenter. Yes, someone in the public are asking for the link to the conference. Is it possible to share it maybe somewhere? So we should send it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next panelist, Jan Selling, the first academician in Sweden researching on anti-Gypsyism, associate professor of history, head of department of critical Romani studies here in Södertörn. He will be giving us the perspective of the CCPEN project here in Sweden. Very welcome, Jan.
Thank you so much. PowerPoint.
30 minutes, Jan. I'm checking.
You did not give him permission to share screen as previously asked.
Miriam, can you make Jan?
Yeah, they should have permissions for sharing the screen.
Okay.
No, both participants screen sharing.
I try now, maybe. I let now multiple participants to share simultaneously. Perfect, yeah.
Det är väldigt omständligt här. Och för att komma vidare, hur gör jag här då? Yes. So. Okay. Thank you. So I won't lose time. Let's dive right into this. Lina already told about the general aims. My research task was to identify processes relevant for combating anti-Gypsyism. Further, the whole Chachipen stands in the tradition of critical theory. We don't just want to describe the world, we want to contribute to a change. I quote from Chachipen, provide the evidence and baseline for the calls for a larger debate on transitional justice with Roma communities, civil society, scholars, policymakers, human rights bodies. End of quote. In this sense, I think the setting of this launch and its participants and also the Romani National Students Meeting yesterday is a perfect setting. Thank you for being here. As Lina also said, the project includes those 4 country reports where it will be especially interesting to compare the Swedish and the German one, since both countries had commissions. But you will have to do that comparison by your own. Today, we will talk only about the Swedish report in detail. The international implications are obvious. Roma is recognized as a national minority in many countries. For the Norwegian participants, I must say that when we in Sweden talk about Roma, we include Roma, resande, Sinti travelers. Roma is a national minority in many countries, but may also be considered to be a transnational minority. And anti-Gypsyism is certainly also a transnational phenomenon. The combating of anti-Gypsyism has increasingly become a European policy area, with the Council of Europe and the EU as main actors. The first sentence of my report reads, at the European level, the Swedish example has frequently been cited in discussions around truth and reconciliation processes concerning Roma and policies against anti-Gypsyism. This kind of statement is often being mocked at as Swedish exceptionalism, quite rightly. But we also need to consider the reasons for the today rapidly vanishing good reputation of Sweden, not only in the so-called third world, but also among minorities and progressives in Europe. The reasons relevant for us today are the hegemony of welfare state ideology in Sweden, which was the baseline for the Swedish Roma rights movement when it started in the 1960s. And even today provides for a higher degree of social equality for Roma when compared to Southeast Europe, with the unbearable exception of the so-called homeless EU migrants. But also there, where it fails, the welfare state ideology is again against what we measure the deficits. Further, the long tradition of Swedish international diplomacy and progressive refugee politics, which gave the impression that Sweden is a solidary country. Further, the pioneer role of Sweden for Holocaust education in the 1990s, which coincided with the general discourse on historical responsibility. Finally, which brings us to the specific topic, that Sweden was the first country to set up a national commission against anti-Gypsyism. Swedish member of Parliament, Soraya Post, and Thomas Hammarberg were both parts of the commission and at the same time extremely active at the European level, which helped inform about a Swedish example. Here a note on terminology. Anti-Ziganism, Swedish for anti-Gypsyism, is the most preferred notion in Swedish Roma civil society and among researchers, as compared to the alternative notion anti-Roma racism. This is more or less also the case in Norway or Germany, whereas, for example, in Romanian context, the term anti-Roma racism might be more preferred. To me, as a researcher specialized in the field and a historian, I can live with and see arguments for both notions, but I argue that anti-Gypsyism is more appropriate to in the North European context because of the differences in history, which I tried to illustrate here. I will not go further into this now, but as you see on the picture to the left here, it's the arrival of the first Roma in Switzerland, Bern, 1485. Roma here were depicted as Muslims, aliens, sorcerers, enemies of the Christ. This kind of anti-Gypsies propaganda had very little to do with actual Roma and was more related to what we call the conceptual Gypsy. And it was aiming at exclusion, put out, don't let in, where Roma came to eradicate their culture and identity, even murder, mass murder, genocide, Holocaust. To the right, we see a drawing of the Romanian Revolution painted Theodor Amman, called An Allegory of the Abolition of Slavery. This slavery lasted for more than 500 years and was legitimized by a racism which aimed at chaining and exploiting Roma physically. This is in so far more related to the anti-Black racism in the Anglo-Saxon slave system. So we may argue for both notions, but certainly not to equate this. It's not the same to say anti-Roma discrimination. We all understand that discrimination is one of many consequences or aspects of racism, but saying it's the same, that would reduce anti-Gypsyism. Just imagine, nobody would call the Holocaust discrimination. But this is the position of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance in their official definition. Very shortly, my report is based on desk research analyzing state inquiries and other official documents relevant to the process leading to the Commission and of the Commission itself, but also concerning the current status of the Swedish National Roma Inclusion Strategy. My research is also informed by the state of the art of research on anti-Gypsyism in Sweden and media discourses. Second basis of my report is interviews, deep interviews with 8 people. They were selected in their capacity of having played key roles in the process around the Swedish Commission against anti-Ziganism and or their personal expertise in the field of anti-Gypsyism and Roma rights in Sweden, as well as meeting the Chachipen criteria that a substantial part, majority of the interviewees identify as Roma. We had discussions in our project team. This means RQ research question 1. Was there a truth and reconciliation process in Sweden? We had discussions in our project team around the theoretical understanding of this problem. Myself and my German colleague Anja Reuss were very hesitant about using the concept of transitional justice on our context, since that concept is linked to the change from one system of injustice to another system of justice, as we had after the Pinochet dictatorship in Chile, the end of apartheid system and the end of state socialism. So when we talk about anti-Gypsyism, regrettably, the situation is another. We have not reached the stage of post-anti-Gypsyism. However, in my report, I conclude that we can still talk about transitional justice as a source of inspiration or a toolbox, which is linked to another concept, which me as a historian prefer, and what I would call historical justice. Historical justice is broader than transitional justice in that it is not limited to juridical processes, but it also includes critical discourses on historical memory, commemoration, compensations, recognition, and non-recognition. As we see, especially by the German example, discourses on historical justice have been essential for building the civil rights movements in recent decades. However, for those of you who know the Swedish history, it's obvious that the Swedish Roma civil rights movements in the 1960s had a completely different basis. It was less referring to historical justice and more to social and civil rights in a more narrow sense. I'm honored that we here in this room have two of the protagonists from that time among us, Hans Kalderas and Thomas Hammarberg, and who all the time from then up to now are keeping up the spirit. Thank you for this. So what role did Truth and Reconciliation play in the last 20 years of Swedish politics concerning Roma rights and the fight against anti-Gypsyism? In fact, it was an essential part of the recommendations of the delegation for Roma issues in 2010. And here we must mention Charles Westin, who was the scientific expert in this delegation. Among other things, it was demanded that Sweden set up an independent Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which should also aim at suggesting collective material compensations, which was inspired by the Norwegian example. This was a key demand of the delegation, which also stated that it must be combined with comprehensive measures against anti-Gypsyism and an inclusion strategy, and a permanent institutional body to supervise that those policies and aims are actually followed. However, this prescription was only followed in small parts by the center-rights government. Instead of an independent commission, a governmental so-called white paper was produced, which was a collection of Roma testimonies of anti-Gypsyist abuses in the 20th century. Second, a 20-year inclusion strategy was launched, which is still in practice. This strategy lacks analysis of anti-Gypsyism and is instead based on the concept of Roma otherness. Roma as a socially and culturally deviant group, which can only be included by mediation. The Swedish Commission against anti-Gypsyism was not part of the plan. It came into being because of the revelation in 2013 that the Swedish police were still keeping massive ethnic registers of Roma. And this came out only through a whistleblower within the police. And the impact was massive. The commission was quickly thought out in-house by the department responsible for the inclusion strategy. It was obvious that the strategy was about to lose all credibility. The commission was a quick fix, and for the moment it was very successful, not least thanks to its composition of majority of Roma and the moral integrity of its chair, Thomas Hammarberg. In a way, the commission reminded of a truth commission, and it was essential in the process of pushing Roma rights versus the police. It also, in a way, pushed an institutional reform, which is another feature requested if we want to talk about truth and reconciliation process. It suggested, namely, to follow up the idea of the delegation for a permanent institution, and also developed a plan for this, now called Roma Center. So, research question 2, what were the outcomes? Many of the demands of the delegation were repeated, of the former delegation were now repeated by this commission. But again, they were never fulfilled. For example, there were no public governmental apologies. And the idea of a permanent institution for Roma rights and the fight against anti-Gypsyism never came into being. An important finding of my report is that that for a short time, impressive impact of the commission disappeared. since there was no follow-up and no politician really dedicated to the issue after that the initiators of the delegation and the commission had disappeared from the political screen. For example, the impact of civilizing media discourses and making the debate on so-called begging less racist. This was a clear effect during its being, but it faded. Yet I also conclude that there are some remaining gains, above all that the concept of a knowledge about anti-Gypsyism is now established and sometimes even understood. So what are the main obstacles today to take up the lead where the Commission ended? Firstly, we have a situation now, not only in Sweden, with right-wing and racist populism in media and politics. This is a heavy obstacle, takes up too much energy. Secondly, structural anti-Gypsyism. In material terms, for example, the lack of high educated Roma. I mean, they are here, it's increasing, but still not where it should be. And this is due to structural anti-Gypsyism. But it's also structural anti-Gypsyism in the discourses around Holocaust memory, where Sweden stubbornly goes against the demands of Roma civil society in the 2015 EU resolution. Instead, Sweden follows suit with the IRA and still excludes Roma from the concept of Holocaust. This has implications in terms of symbolic non-recognition, not prioritizing the struggle against anti-Gypsyism, and not funding research on anti-Gypsyism. Another obstacle which I identify is what I call the inclusion ideology, which builds on the criteria, as I said, of otherness. It tends to blur the diversity of Roma and creates the archetype of Roma as being culturally and socially other. For those of us who have studied theory and history of anti-Gypsyism, it's obvious that this is nothing else than a renovated form of Gypsylorism or academic anti-Gypsyism. This ideology is maintained by governmental civil servants and legitimized by a dysfunctional system of so-called Roma consultation, which I hope that Dr. Stenros maybe will say something about, because he's an expert especially on that field. This consultation model follows the mode decide first and inform after. Further, the Roma advisors are rarely invited due to competence and play their role perfectly well just for maintaining the system. One finding of my report, specific finding, is that this combination of inclusion ideology and dysfunctional consultation model was the main reason that the Swedish government in 2021 self-sufficiently refused the demands of the European Commission to upgrade the inclusion model according to the new standards, which would, instead of focusing on Roma otherness, focus on anti-Gypsyism as the root cause of inequality. So, as I said, there were also gains and promising examples. The immediate key purpose of the Commission was fulfilled as Roma became justice against the police. And the head of police, as you see here, apologized. The practice was condemned in court and the register became a compensation. Above all, the Commission was successful in agenda setting during its mandate, and it's evidently contributed, as I said, to establishing the concept. But here, other impacts is that this process leading up to it inspired the ongoing Sami Truth Commission. This Sami political process was inspired by this and learned from the mistakes of the corresponding Roma process. Yet, and also the German Bundestag Commission on Anti-Gypsyism benefited from the Swedish experience. Yet there is widespread frustration that the Swedish Commission did not have a lasting effect, as I said, due to lack of time, resources, and political will. Some interviewees also stressed that lack of independence was a major weakness. But I also want to mention, when we now try to pick up this lead, resources to build on. I want to mention mother tongue education and public service, minority public service, radio and television, which is not quite unique, but unusual in European contexts. And it's very, very important. And we will have to defend those institutions soon. I'm sure about that. Another thing is the diversity of Roma community in Sweden, which is also larger than in many countries. This is sometimes described as a problem, but I think it's a huge resource because that's a very efficient tool against this homogenizing stereotypical image of what is Roma. This shows there are so many ways of being Roma. And also what we see here, even in the room, a growing number of high educated Roma, but also to mention state officials, teachers, non-Roma as well, who are understanding this and they are dedicated, they want to change something. So this is my last part here. Recommendations, because it was demanded that we also come up with recommendations. So first recommendation, that the new, as I said, the new renovated European standards for inclusion strategies, the new framework should be fully implemented and monitored. And this prescribes a paradigmatic shift in focus from a one-sided focus on Roma as the problem towards a holistic approach to anti-Gypsyism. Second, Roma participation in policymaking must be better secured. Since Swedish Roma society, civil society is weak through fragmentation and so forth, we don't have this organization like in Germany. There is, I identify, like also did the Commission, the delegation, and Carlotta Wickman, another inquiry, there is a need for the time being for a permanent institutionalized Romani representation. And but we also need to have an improvement of consultation methods and strengthen Roma civil society through higher education. Policy measures against anti-Gypsyism must be multidimensional and grounded in scientific knowledge, which presupposes that funding and structural conditions for independent and academic knowledge production are secured at national and European levels. The transnational dimensions of the history of anti-Gypsyism, such as history and contemporary, such as racialized poverty, the Roma Holocaust, and the legacy of Romani enslavement in Romania, must all be acknowledged as part of European truth and reconciliation processes. Last, all forms of anti-Gypsyism must be explicitly and unequivocally condemned by state institutions and governments. This would provide a basis also for media and the etiquette of political talk. And this will ultimately impact public opinion. Finally, one important conclusion is that Roma ownership of a truth and reconciliation process, this presupposes powerful, dedicated, and knowledgeable allies in the state who are dedicated to ensuring meaningful participation, but also the careful planning of Roma civil society structures. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. We don't have time for questions right now, but please, for the discussions later, can you think of question regarding like what your truths are when it comes to the Commission against anti-Gypsyism's work in Sweden? If you have some remarks to when it comes to the Commission's work, what have been good, what have not been so successful, and what do we need to do more? So the next one, and we are 5 minutes after the schedule, and we have two discussants left. So please, I have to beg you to be a bit shorter. So we have time for the questions. We are ending this panel discussion 10:40. So you know, and so I will give the floor to the next panelist, the discussant, Dr. Marco Stenros, expert of policy analysis of the area of Roma strategic in the Nordic countries. Please welcome up, and you will give us some perspective of what you hear from Jan Selling and also Lina on the Chachupan project. Yeah, you can do that.
Yes, first, thank you for the invitation. And Jan gave us a wide issue, sort of providing a lot of issues that can be considered. But I will start with the last one and saying about this structural organization of Romani issues and also combating anti-Gypsyism. And I'm sitting in this chair having two hats. First, I was studying and I did my PhD about the implementation of national Roma policy implementation in Finland, and I was watching what happened among Roma when these kind of policies are implemented, how the Roma receive it and what they thought about it. And now currently I'm working at the governmental institution to create the new Roma strategy. So I'm responsible for what is going to happen up to 2030 in Finland. So being critical in my thesis now pays back to me that I have to improve those what haven't been done before. We have a different way of tackling issues, and the first thing what we have is that actually we have good structural and permanent organizations to promote Roma policies in Finland. We have the advisory board on Romani affairs under Ministry of Social Affairs and Health, and there is a main secretary who is Roma person, and then there is a advisory board that consists of 16 members, of which are half Roma members. So, and these are guaranteed by the governmental act. So it means that it's permanent and it's in the act. So it's a legal body to take care of the Roma issues in Finland. Sorry, so I'm now closer. And plus for that, we have 4 different planning officers in North, in South, West and East Finland, which are also taking care of the regional issues of Roma, and it's also protected by the governmental act. So the position is guaranteed. So that gives the basic thing for doing Finnish Roma policy work. Plus, there is a Finnish education team in the agency of National Agency of Finnish Education. So they take care of the Roma language and culture in that sense. I'm working at the Finnish Institute for Health and Well-being, and we are responsible for the Roma issue in that institution. So we can say that we have these structures where the things works, but we have the similar issues in Sweden. Just the last year, no, it was actually this spring, the policy revealed the Discipline 1 project, which was observing the Finnish Roma in capital area. And the process is ongoing now. And the first report that the police gave was confidential, so they didn't want to publish it, but they had to because of the ombudsman of the equality asked them to make it public. And now it has been taken to the advisory board on Roma issue to deal with and how the police responds on it. So we have this anti-gypsism going on in Finland as well. But the difference what we have here is with the wording. And I understand that in the academic and historical, when we are going further back to the Holocaust and so on, it's anti-gypsism is the word that we should use. But when I'm having the hat of governmental institution now and the practical thing, we like to use the word anti-Roma discrimination. And the reason for that is that in advisory report, there is people from the 90s, and they were really strictly saying that in the 90s, we did a lot of work to remove the word gypsy from the official documents, and we don't want to have that back in any form in our official documents. So I understand that we have to separate this level of academic writing, and then we have to separate the practical work of policy work. And it's kind of how we do it. Plus that, we have really good actually governmental action plans and strategies, for example, anti-racism, where anti-gypsism is included through the Roma policy. So we mainstream the things in the political affairs. And what, because I studied Roma policies and implementation in Europe for many years, I realized that the one thing is that they are not mainstream. And as Jan found it out, the short-term things doesn't work. They are not rooted anywhere. So when I was planning the new policy, I made sure that already in that phase, there was a mainstreaming to other strategies of Finland, that it cannot be removed after, changing the government or something. So it remains there until up to 2030. So the mainstreaming is one important thing, and it's supported also by the EU strategic framework for equality, inclusion, and participation. And I have to say that it's a pity that in Sweden it is not followed, because it is really good basic documentation to do the national policies. And I can lead on that really perfectly in each issue and make the concrete how the anti-gypsism is displayed in Finland. So I take the housing, employment, I take the health and those kind of things. So I concretize those anti-gypsies in different sectors. So that different sectors make it more easy for the government official to understand what is happening. And after they understand what is happening in different sectors, we can talk about the anti-gypsism in the ideological level or academic level and make it understandable for the governmental workers. But if we go with this kind of paper for the official workers, they don't have time to read it, to be honest. And the other thing is that they don't have resources. So we have to have exact plan how to do this and how to get the funding for doing it. If the government is not allocating money for it, then it has to be guaranteed in a different way. And when I was working really closely with different ministries, some of them were easy, some were not so easy to deal with, but I stood up because I started the workshop with Roma people. And my idea was that nothing comes to the Roma policy unless it comes from the Roma people first. And after that, the Roma people gave me the ideas what should be there. Then I started to discuss with the ministry, and I didn't back up. I insisted certain things that this has to be there. So the strength what we have in Finland is that we have Roma people working in the different positions, in the governmental position, and we have Roma working in the association, and there is 16 local Roma working groups that are appointed by the city councils. So that is guaranteeing the structures. But the problem is, of course, that there is practical problem, but the foundation of the work is okay in Finland. So maybe that was it.
Yeah, I mean, we will have time for questions after we're closing the discussion with the panelists. Please also, if you have questions, you can put it on the platform, So we already have some question ready when we are coming to that section. The last but not least panelist is Isabella, and please, I'm sorry if I'm not spelling your last name correct. Micheleshi from Ergo. Isabella will talk about the perspective of the European Roma grassroots organizations and from the perspective of the political importance of on working on the Roma rights and for promoting Roma rights and combating anti-Gypsyism. Listen to what our panelists have talked about in the Chachipan project. Very welcome, Isabel.
Thank you so much. And it's indeed a great pleasure for me to join you here today. I'm sorry that it's just virtually and it's not in person in Sweden. I think it's also great to be here with you and discuss the Swedish report also because we often talked and heard about the good practices on fighting anti-Gypsyism in Sweden, and now we have the occasion to a little bit deconstruct a bit this concept and try and understand what has been good, what has been less good, what we can learn, and how we can build on past experiences, and how we can share and exchange experiences from various countries. The Ergo network, as Lina has mentioned previously, is one of the partners in this project consortium that mainly ensures the part with capacity building and empowerment of organizations, and also helps to create coalitions of NGOs at a national level. And so I was also asked to also look, and this is what I'm going to do, from our perspective as a pan-European network of grassroots organization, of at what it has been recommended within the Swedish report, and you know, what would be maybe the next step to follow, and also having maybe a political perspective, as you mentioned. And so looking at and listening to the presentation of Jan and reading through the report, it becomes very clear from the outset that one of the next steps to follow, it's really to revise, in our opinion, and in my opinion, if you want, to revise this strategy. And to have a strategy that is predated to the EU framework and not be consistent with what the Council recommendation and what the European Commission framework for equality, inclusion and participation of Roma says, it's not really sustainable on a long term, unfortunately. And so when reading actually the rereading, if you want, the Swedish strategy that has been put in place, we can read already that anti-Gypsyism is mentioned 17 times, and it uses, if you want, discrimination and anti-Gypsyism as terminology almost interchangeably, without discussing or mentioning also, like Jan mentioned in his report, the structural perspective of anti-Gypsyism. And its systemic aspects as well within society at large, but also particularly within institutions. And there is no definition also, because also the previous speaker was speaking about, you know, how anti-Gypsyism is perceived in Finland and the terminology that is being used. While we heard that in Sweden, it is okay to use the terminology of anti-Gypsyism, we haven't actually, I haven't identified a definition that is corresponding, for instance, with the definition of the ECRI, the Council of Europe ECRI, or even the Alliance Against Anti-Gypsyism definition of anti-Gypsyism, which characterize this phenomenon as a form of racism against Roma, a historically rooted structural phenomenon that appears in institutional, social, and interpersonal levels. So that's also something that I think should be reflected upon, because we cannot talk about the phenomenon and try to tackle it unless we actually understand what it means, and we also try to identify all its manifestation and try to tackle them in a systemic and systematic way as well. When we look at what the European Commission is providing and what is recommending in its guidelines that are attached to the EU framework, is that member states, and that includes Sweden, have to recognize anti-Gypsyism and take responsibility to act against it, to recognize the historical dimension, in particular the Holocaust, and promote reconciliation, to fight its manifestations, to combat hate speech and hate crimes as manifestations of anti-Gypsyism, to promote access to justice for victims, to dismantle and to prevent institutional and structural discrimination that is experienced by Roma. And this is only as a standalone priority. But then the Commission also provides for guidance when it comes to how to address it from a horizontal or cross-cutting perspective, which includes fighting segregation in education, and fighting discrimination in all the fields, prevent human rights violation, including forced sterilization, fight spatial segregation, prevent forced evictions, and regularly collect data on discrimination. And that's, if we then look at the strategy in Sweden, we see that a lot of these aspects are missing, although, as we have heard and we have read, the claims were that we don't need to revise it because we have everything that is needed within, and that's not the case. The Swedish strategy talks about data collection and monitoring by tasking this county administrative board to develop a monitoring system. But I don't know of, and probably participants from Sweden have more information, whether very specific and targeted indicators to monitor the fight against anti-Gypsyism have been developed to date. And what we have seen, and I think it's also related to what Jan has mentioned in his presentation, we are missing a basic mapping of the situation of Roma in the various fields within the strategy. It's just a very generic presentation, and then it's action, which begs the question of, like, how are we able to monitor? What is the baseline that we are starting? And I think that it would be recommended that that Sweden and the authorities engage with the Fundamental Rights Agency to have a similar, if you want, survey on the situation of Roma in Sweden and anti-Gypsyism in particular, similarly with the recent study that FRA has done in 10 countries. The report and also the presentation from Jan shed light about the so-called or the so-perceived good practices and the positive developments that Sweden has registered to date in the area of fighting anti-Gypsyism. The white paper that was mentioned, the setting up of the commission, but it's really important to also see with this report the conditions of how it happened, and the specific situations, the challenges within, and the limitations, and if you want, the shortcomings, including in the political standing of this commission and its short life that it had, which was linked obviously to the political commitment at the time.
Sorry,
And
Isabel, 1 minute left. Sorry.
1 minute. Yeah, there are so many things to say,
Yeah,
but
I
if
know.
I am to do a recommendation in the context of the topic that we are discussing, as ergo, but also based on the Roma Civil Monitoring Report, and I've seen that you have some, I think you may have the national coordinator of the Roma Civil Monitoring also attending, is to have and to create national coalitions of civil society, because we heard a lot of criticism of the lack of structured participation and structured mechanism of participation of Roma, not just having them formally involved. And so we believe that having both national coalitions of civil society organizations, but also transnational coalition of civil society organizations would actually create not just a political momentum, but would also build on knowledge and the experience and expertise at regional level to be able to build on what has been already created at every single national level, and to fight together against the established against the fight against anti-Gypsyism, but also to fight for the establishment of independent truth and reconciliation bodies or mechanism, because this is something that we are missing. And we can also see examples of the Commission on Anti-Gypsyism in Germany, which is not entirely independent. And so I think that this is something that we really need to create these coalitions, to put in place independent mechanisms, and to basically ensure that the member states understand what anti-Gypsyism really is, and that put in place concrete local measures to fight manifestations of anti-Gypsyism directly and concretely, and also have a solid monitoring mechanism. I will stop here, but I'm definitely going to stay if there are any questions or comments from the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we have some minutes left, more precisely about 5. Please, if you have some questions, now is the time to ask our phenomenal panelists who have done a really good job, and also respecting the time as well. Yeah.
I would suggest that you ask now more Isabella and Marco, because I
Yeah.
will be more.
Yeah. So Isabella, Marco, do you want to add something on the discussion, or is it something you think of?
Yes, actually, it's about a systematic and structural institutionalized discrimination which has to be tackled, and which, in my opinion, is the most important thing. And then there is the everyday racism that the people meet on the street, on shops, or everywhere. But we have to start with the structural issues and the institutionalized discrimination first. And when we are trying to justify it, like this idea of letting people know what anti-Gypsyism means, we have to start from the sectoral point of view, like the EU strategy. There is a horizontal principles, which are equality, inclusion, and participation, and anti-Gypsyism. But to understand people who are not into this issue, we have to approach from the sectoral point of view: education, health, employment, and so on, so that it is concrete. And after that, we can create the holistic picture of what anti-Gypsyism mean in current situation and in particular society.
And let us see if the participants maybe have some questions to Marco or Isabella on what they reacted on when it comes to the Chachipen project.
Yes, there is a question here on the concept of anti-Tsiganism, someone says, which is rather unknown in Romania. What do you think about using the term in Romanian context? Thank you. So that is a question from Andra Dragiciu. If I can then take this question, is just to say that already, yes, the term anti-Gypsyism, which would be anti-Tsiganism in Romania, is not so well known at the level of the population, but it is quite known amongst policymakers and stakeholders, in that also we have already a secondary legislation on anti-Tsiganism in Romania on criminal offenses. And so it is a well-established already terminology. in Romania, but it's true there is not much awareness about it, and there are still, as it has been mentioned in other countries as well, including in Finland, there is still this dual reaction to the terminology, with the same argumentation that while we are trying to get rid of gypsy in a daily language, we are using it in fighting racism against Roma. And the idea about it is that it's so pervasive in the way it manifests. It affects so many people, whether they are Roma or not Roma, based on the imagery that in order to fight it effectively, we need to be using it as a shocking, if you want, almost mechanism to try and make sure that we are not going to use all the other terms linked to anti-Gypsyism in real life, and we avoid to actually discriminate against Roma because it is such a pervasive form of racism. But obviously for us, and that's the last thing I wanted to say on terminology, as Ergo network, it doesn't matter so much the terminology in itself. It matters how we understand it, and we should understand it as a pervasive form of institutional and structural racism. And also, what do we do to actually fight it? And this is the most important aspect about the fight against anti-Gypsyism.
Thank you, Isabella. Let me see if we have some more questions on the chat, because I don't, is it possible for me to? Oh, yes, here. So Nina have a question, which is, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but it's very long, and I don't think we have time to go through this comment. But thank you very much, Nina, for your comment. And then we have a question to Jan Selling. What can you tell us about the interviews behind your report? I assume that you see the interviews as your sources, which you report is transparent with. Will the name of your interviews be public?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Can I use this? Well, you can read that in the report, which is downloadable. In the beginning, it says that I interviewed those 8 people, and they are named, and they agreed to have their names because it was beneficial for the structure of understanding, and it would not be possible to anonymize in a way. So that was the reason that me and the interviewees agreed on this. And the interviews themselves, they were conducted during a short time to have the same context. It was winter 2020, last winter. It was, I made the interviews because of Corona on Zoom. They lasted for about an hour and were recorded for my transcription purposes. So this is how I used it. And as I said, this is not the sole basis of the analysis. It's the combination of reading the piles of documents and inquiries, and to get this deeper understanding. And also some details are never written out. Why did this come up to being, especially how the Commission Against Anti-Gypsyism came into being? That was really necessary to have those interviews to understand what actually happened.
Thank you, Jan. And then the last question, which I will take from the chat, is from Elin Tomansson. As a museum employee, I wonder what thoughts the panelists have on the role of art and culture institution for the fighting of anti-Gypsyism.
Well, I think that, well, we have one expert here in the room, actually, Peter Nylund, it's called Decolonizing Arts. And this is academic term for this, but I think that every public, especially publicly funded institutions, have to make an analysis. What is the perspective? There has to be an anti-Gypsyism critical perspective. I mean, it cannot be possible that so many artifacts made by Roma people are exhibited without even mentioning that they were produced by Roma craftsmen and artists, for example.
Yes, you can add, you can add.
Also, personally, I think like after decades or what, 12, 14 years, I've been in this academic world. So I have started to make an opinion that we have to actually fight and combat these anti-Gypsies through the art and through the spoken words and through these different kinds of performance, so that we are not preaching for the people, but through the performance, we give them the example of what is happening in the society and what is the role of the, for example, Swedish majority people in this play. So we reflect upon them, so they make them think themselves what is going on. And I personally think art and performance is extremely important to sending the message.
Thank you, Marco. With that, I have to close this seminar. Please continue the discussion outside now when you take a break and have some coffee for coming back to the next one. And thank you for all of your important input today.
Mihaela? Mihaela, do you hear me?
Structural issues that we have.
I was impressed that you so different perspective.
Hi, Soraya. You are muted. You are muted. I don't hear you.
No, still not yet.
No,
Like,
I don't know.
Is it okay?
Yes. Hi,
Yes.
how are you? How are you feeling now?
Ah, Isabella, I am now I turn into my bedroom.
Sorry,
got-
just to mention, I think we are still on streaming.
Oh, we are. Okay. Anyhow, I'm super happy that you could join, Isabella, because you're really a rock in this issue for so many years. And you're so very clear about everything. Nobody can misunderstand you. And I'm very happy for that. But I raised my hand because I wanted to say something about, when I initiated this about truth and reconciliation,
Yes.
when during time in the parliament, and had the 2 days conference after having the study done by SEPS. Do you remember, Lina? I requested a study and you provided the possibilities of European truth and reconciliation. And then further on, the Commission agreed on, I pushed them really hard to do more research on this, and they agreed on that. But my thinking at that time, because I heard there were now and my mind in the beginning is because I am still today so convinced of the consensus made by the society, which means that all actors in society had an agreement on anti-Gypsies, how to treat Roma and Sinti. And it comes to police, royalties, politicians, actors, painters, writers, all the actors in a society. So if we are really going to have a truth and reconciliation committees, they have to look at all these aspects from a society to create another form of consensus that we all agree on acting together against anti-gypsies. And that's mean all actors, which means that we have to highlight the strength of some painters, how they profiled Roma women, for example, how writers in their books described us, Roma, which really did support the picture and strengthen the consensus of the attitudes towards Roma. I think that this is very important. And I think this has to be highlighted also in the discussion.
For
that,
sure. I mean, what was shocking for me when reading through the report, which has the whole process very detailed, like what happened in Sweden, is like it just happened like this quickly with the white paper and then with the commission, just because the government was stressed out, knowing he needs to respond to the situation with the police registration, with all, you know, with all the cases that were raising up. And so they were just responding without actually assessing, doing a mapping, doing a wide consultation, just saying, okay, so we are doing this, huh? And then we are doing the commission, and it happened again like this. And then it's like, yeah, but civil society was consulted, but civil society was not consulted. This Roma Council, because that's the thing, you have Roma Council in Spain also, right, Lina? We have a similar Roma Council, and so they are using a lot of these so-called consultative mechanisms to argue that we have consulted, but there was no wide consultation. We didn't have all of the things that you mentioned, Soraya, that we should go and do this. So how do we actually create a mechanism that it is inclusive and it is reflective of all the different voices within the Roma community? And I do think it has to be independent of what I wanted to say, but obviously I had to just decide what to put from the points that I had made, and also announce maybe there is still an opportunity. Now the commission just opened on the 8th of December this serve call, where you also have the fight against anti-Gypsyism, and so I think there is a budget of like 400,000 million euros for like 2 years project with minimum 100,000. And so I think that we should use, because I've seen examples of coalitions of organizations, for instance, like in the Czech Republic, that have used the funds, I think particularly ESF funds they use to create these national coalitions and remain to some extent independent, and then they decide who is, you know, like who is inside, and hopefully can be more inclusive. And even if it's temporarily for 2 years, at least they have a moment, and this is what I wanted to also talk, like they create something more like informal, if it's still possible, and they work together. They see how it works, what they have to learn, who else has to be, how big it has to be. And then after these 2 years, so it's like a pilot type of, then they decide to, okay, so we are going to have this type of platform or coalition or whatever it's called. Because I think that if we are waiting for the commission or for the government to create consultative mechanisms for Roma, it's always going to be linked to a government structure by default, because they are setting them up. And it's going to be more tokenistic. And I also heard about Sweden, that basically most of the Roma in Sweden are I just read in the RCM report, are hired as public officials. And so you lose the role in Sweden as watchdogs, NGOs. You don't have that anymore. Everybody works in a ministry, and then they say, oh, but Roma have been involved. But once you step in this administrative role, you don't belong anymore to civil society. And so I think there are a lot of deficiencies with these empowerment processes and participation. So I'm happy that we started this debate. Maybe we continue, Alina, in Madrid to have the second part of it.
Yes,
Of, you know, and so maybe we can actually use this period with the funding, why not, to think of something that makes more sense for us, where we are not pushed to do something, where we put something on the table.
I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, I had a bit of reflection when I read, but it was, you know, I was like, you know, taken aback a little bit with this report. It's like, this was not such a good practice. Oh, this is, you know.
the same for us, because in the beginning, everyone kind of applauded, and ourselves. You remember when we did the first study on institutionalized institutional forms of anti-Gypsyism, that we put this as a promising practices, highlighted all the positive contributions. It was also 2017, 16 at that time.
When the commission was still existing in 16.
Yeah. It was still kind of very fresh and very new. And okay, maybe now, you know, with some years, after some years have passed, we see also, you know, what could have been done better. And
but Soraya, how did it actually die, the commission? Because I read that it just, the political party lost the elections and then it didn't. What happened?
There was a political change, governmental change.
Yeah.
In 2014, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it was the Social Democrats and the Green Party who came into power. And they were not serious. Let's say like that. And I know for sure, because, you know, I have been in all these inquiries or these delegations since 2004 when we started. And then it was a discrimination ombudsman who started to write in his report, and I was in the board, about anti-Gypsies. And then it went on, and there was change of political color, blah, blah, blah. And what we requested from the first delegation on Roma issue was a real truth and reconciliation committee who will tackle all this area I spoke about before. And but he was from the Liberal Party, but the ruling party was like the moderate, like the EPP group in the parliament, you know.
Yeah.
And they also was the Minister of Finance. So the report ended up at the finance ministry for some years and really didn't happen. So I know the minister from for integration, who was in charge of minority issues, he really had to struggle to get something out of it. And I must say, he was the first minister who really believed in what we said. So he wanted to have like this, how to say, at least he could manage to have this 20th century's white book. I was very critical from the beginning, but anyhow, that's what he managed to do in their coalition of different political parties from center to right. So he couldn't do anything more. And then when we delivered the white paper, and then when we delivered the report and recommendation from the Commission Against Anti-Gypsies, they already changed political color again.
Yeah.
And and they had been in opposition for some years and really took on their political idea of, you know, labor market, you know, and then it came the migration, you know, wave. So again, Roma were put aside. So, and that had been the case since then. It is not a priori question. You said yourself, Isabella, the framework, Sweden doesn't follow it because they think they are good enough.
Yes,
Yeah, and they are not. And the case what we are now facing about media, about attacking Romani Greece, attacking the Roma honor culture, honor violence culture, but the way they do it is terrifying. I tell you, terrifying. And so we are so weak after being quite strong for a time. We are totally demolished in Sweden now, and we have no power at all. And now with this new government, there are one minister of labor market who has the responsibility of minorities, and there is a minister of culture who has responsibility to have this how to say, discussions with Roma in like a council. I'm in that council. I couldn't go on the first meeting, but I'm afraid for the future, for the development. I hope for the Commission, and I spoke to Livia about the situation in Sweden, and I hope for the Commission to put some more pressure on Sweden. And I don't even know who is the Roma national contact point for. I don't even know that. So so I don't know what kind of presentation there is at the Commission's platforms meeting, or the meetings with the national Roma contact points.
Yeah.
And also, Lisa, I left Sweden for 5 years, and coming back, and now I am one of these civil servants in a Roma center in my city until December, dealing with the national strategy, like this. But as you said, I cannot be a watchdog because I am a civil servant, so I am limited what to say, and this is my frustration. So I think I will stop that, because I don't feel good because of this.
Yeah,
And
and I think that creates a lot of pressure on Roma in Sweden, because there is a need for Roma representation in institutions, but at the same time, you cannot take all the Roma and put them in institutions. You have to also have Roma civil society. And so I think this empowerment process has to be extended a little bit to be more national-wide, but also more local level. I don't know how many local level Roma NGOs are in Sweden, but we don't get to hear them a lot. And so I think that there needs to be more investment on a grassroots level.
But this is the problem. Yes, but this is the problem, Isabella. The civil Roma movement is not strong, and as Jan said, we are divided in different groups, and this is used against us. It has never been a favor or push. For me, it's shit. I don't like it, because if we could unify, because when we are criticized by majority, they don't look if you are Finnish Roma or Sinti. I mean, then we are judged as a collective. And that's why I think we should work as a collective, despite we're different groups, Roma groups, but we haven't got there yet. And the reason why I work in my city now is because there is no institution or no structure who really gives the support to the daily life, the needs or problems Roma are facing. So that's why I went there, and there is a need for this, but it should not be on behalf of Roma NGOs. But sorry to say, even before the civil servants, Roma civil servant, there was never a strong organization of Roma, and this is our problem here. And it is like in many other countries, because of the organizations are dependent on fundings. Yeah, and so that's why it's difficult to organize a collective NGOs, to work to be unified in solidarity. So there are strategies who are working against us, and sorry to say, not too many Roma from Sweden have been on international or European level, so they don't know it. I know it because I've been there, but they don't. So they maybe don't see the positive, how to say it. No, they don't. And more, they don't even care what's happened outside Sweden, as long as I get my fundings and can do my local projects.
Yeah, and I understood when we had some meetings with some of the civil society. I won't say names because we are on a live streaming, but I've also understood that there is some level of exhaustion in Sweden about monitoring reports. You know, Roma being asked to do reports, but then they are not really, and this is what I've seen also in the RCM report, they're not actually involved in the preparation. They are just being asked sometimes for input, and they don't get to see the final product. There is no access to some of these monitoring reports that the different authorities in Sweden are doing. And so transparency of information, I've seen it's also an issue. But then back to your point on civil society not going out of Sweden, and that's actually something that happens not just in Sweden, but I think it happens in all the Nordic countries, in most of the Western European countries, where you see that there is this situation where on the one hand, Roma NGOs, they keep to themselves in their own countries. They don't really communicate, or if they communicate regionally. Let's say Sweden will communicate with Finland, with Norway, but not really beyond that. But also we don't really reach out. The ones that historically have bigger experience, let's say, with civil society and organizing as a movement, we don't actually reach out too often to the NGOs in Sweden, in Finland, and we don't have these exchanges unless it's part of a project, unless it's part of a, I don't know what initiative. So that's why I think that the strength, when you don't have such a strong civil society across European countries, the strength of it all would be to try and invest in this transnational type of coalition to find solutions to, because like, as you said, there is also a question of money. Because people say, oh, but you can do things without money. Yes, you can do things without money when you have the other capacities, when we have the knowledge. But when yourself, you have to learn about stuff, you have to improve your abilities, your capacities, your skills. You do need training, you do need to learn, you do need to have access to other institutions, type of information. And you don't just read and all of a sudden you become smarter than you were yesterday on your own alone. There are people that can do that, obviously. And so I do think that if we then invest in each other transnationally, we don't look at ourselves, as you said, as just people from Sweden, from Finland, from Romania, but just Roma, because anyhow we are looked at as gypsies anyhow, regardless from where we come from. I think then there is a chance that, you know, maybe in a few years, we will have more common messaging, we will have more power to demand things, and there will be more accountability and transparency on the part of the governments.
Yes, I think this is very crucial, the transnational, because we have to recognize that we are judged as one group across the globe, actually. And this is why I think we need to have a transnational movement to fight all against this. But you know, there are some very strong activists in Sweden too. But and why it has been, I mean, why it look as it looked that the Nordic countries are there and not in connection with the rest of Europe is also because I think the movement in Europe also always thought that in Nordic country the situation are so much better, but it is not. And now finally it's getting out that it is not. And I think it have been more obvious because we have also changed the perspective. You know, when I entered the party, for me it was so important to go from Roma as a social issue to a human rights issue. you know. And now we can see that when we look at from that perspective, we don't look at social issues as poverty or segregation in that manner as we did before.
Right.
Now we have a more clear human rights perspective. Then we can see, oh my God, even in Sweden, who is that democratic and gender equality country, you know, all these, we can see, oh my God, the situation on rights is just the same as in the other countries. Even though we have better living conditions like in housing, you know, food on the table, all this. But that is because the general living condition for the Swedes are higher than maybe in Bulgaria, you know. Yeah. So this is the difference, but the anti-gypsies has the same color.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yes, and you guys went there from Romania, some of you, to Sweden and Finland. So you know, you took with you a lot of luggage.
Yeah. I think it is the biggest Roma diaspora ever when the slavery ended. Is that what you mean?
No, even with the second wave, when, you know, when Roma got to the Scandinavian countries, and that's why when I speak to Roma in Scandinavian countries, I like it because it's like the same language I speak at home, basically.
Yeah. But that was after the slavery, the biggest wave.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and then the second wave is when the communists fall.
Yeah.
In the eastern part. I think they are getting ready in there.
Yes, I hope so too. Right, Lina?
Yes, and I see that actually this, I don't know, we can have maybe as a conference is the design of coffee break conversations, you know.
Yes, why not? Yes, and also to engage with the participants as well. If they want to.
And actually participants have been engaging. So we have some, I don't know, comments coming from Murat Haliti. If you see, he's pointing basically where there is a contact point in Sweden at Ministry of Employment
Right.
Division and Discrimination. But I'm sure that Soraya Post and Isabella know these people or have been working with these colleagues, Miss Malise Nilsson.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so it's not, maybe to Murat's comment, it's not that civil society or colleagues do not know where those coordination points are, but you know, the power, the mandates of those contact points to extend the engagement with the civil society. Okay. We hear, we hear from the audience. Okay. I muted colleagues on the panel while they are setting up. Okay. Okay, yeah, now can you unmute?